Student loans are a pretty contentious topic which stir up loads of questions like, is a degree really worth it? And was it robbery when they increased the interest rates? But today we're going to be diving into the only question that really matters for your personal finances, and that is, should you make any overpayments? Now, with the average loan balance in the UK sitting at around about £53,000, not many people are going to be in a position where they could clear that amount in one go. So, really, what we're talking about today is whether somebody should make regular or kind of one off annual overpayments, chipping away at that loan balance, or actually whether it's better off that they ignore the loan altogether and they do something else with that money that might be available. Now, it's really important that we actually start with some of the ground rules with student loans because they are very different to some other types of debt that you can take on. And number one, the thing we need to remember is that nobody is going to knock on your front door and ask for a repayment in full. With some other types of debt, mortgages or unsecured loans, that could happen. But with student loans, that is not the case. Number two, we need to remember that actually these loans actually expire after a period of time. And usually that will be either 30 years after you graduate or the age of 65. And again, other types of debt will stay with you and your estate when you pass away forever, when actually with student loans, they will vanish after a period of time. And that's going to be really important for the answer that we give. And finally, the interest rate on student loans will actually move with inflation. And that means when inflation is quite low, it's a good thing. It's not going to cost us too much to actually have borrowed a fair amount of money. But also when inflation is very high, like during 2024, the interest rate that we repay on our loans can be really steep and as high as kind of 8 to 9%, depending on the timings. So, without further ado, let's answer the key question: when should somebody make overpayments? In a nutshell, here, the answer is whether you will naturally repay your loan before that 30-year time frame expires. If you are somebody whose earnings are high enough or that your debt is small enough that you will naturally repay that loan at some point, it might make sense for you to make some overpayments. On the flip side, if you are somebody who it's highly unlikely you will ever repay that loan in full during its timeline of 30 years or up to the age of 65, it might make a lot of sense to actually ignore it as much as you can and not make any repayments whatsoever. And you might be thinking, that's really weird. Surely if I have debt, I should think about paying it back. But as I mentioned at the start, student loans are a very specific type of debt that have some different rules attached to it. And so if you're in that second scenario where it's highly unlikely that you will ever repay that student loan, if you were to make overpayments during the term of it, in essence, you're throwing money away because ultimately you are still going to have to repay the loan for the same amount of time. It's going to last for 30 years. So if you're making an overpayment, it might make sense just not to bother at all and do something else with that money. However, if you are somebody who is very likely to repay the loan before 30 years, you could end up saving yourself a significant amount of interest by making an overpayment. And let's run through a really simple example for a second. So let's run through a very simple example. And this is where somebody has graduated. They have around about £27,000 in student debt. And they started with a £30,000 per year income. Now, the reality in this situation, if we forecast out that person's future using some pretty conservative assumptions that I'll put up on the screen now, then the reality is that this person, even when they come to the age 65 or 30 years after they have retired, they still have around about £36,000 worth of student debt remaining at that point, which remember would be wiped at that point. And so even if this person made a £10,000 overpayment early on, it's still forecast that they would have a remaining student loan balance after 30 years. So effectively, that money has been thrown away for zero benefit. And now let's switch it to a slightly different example, which I agree is very unlikely. But same situation, someone has £27,000 worth of student debt, but they have started with a salary of £60,000. Lucky them. Now, the reality is if we forecast out that person's future, they will clear their student loan in 20 years. And as a result of that, we should start to think about, okay, overpayments could make a lot of sense here, because ultimately we could reduce the number of years that we are repaying this student loan, because by making an overpayment, we're going to save on the future interest that would be charged on it. So if that person was naturally going to clear that debt in about 20 years, and that person chooses to, say, make a £10,000 single overpayment as soon as they got the loan, that 20 years is actually brought all the way down to 7 years. And at that point, that student loan would be fully repaid. And so if you take one thing away from this video, just think and use the free calculator that I've included in the comment below. If you are someone who is likely to repay your student loan within the 30 years, overpayments could make a lot of sense. If you're not going to, just think about that student loan as an extra graduate tax that you're going to pay for 30 years or so. Hopefully that's been helpful.